ZK is a really powerful, almost like translation tool where you can use it to like translate all of these different programming languages into something that Bitcoin can understand. Like really the possibilities are near endless. And I think that's going to unleash a whole new wave of innovation on Bitcoin. And yeah, your kids are going to love it.
Okay, John Light, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to chat. So,
Anytime.
so I will kind of set the stage here. I always get super excited when talking to you. Like, you have a pretty insane breadth of knowledge on all things Bitcoin, from technical to ideological to general Bitcoin lore. And for me personally, you are probably the single most important person that has kind of like leveled up my Bitcoin game. So I'm giving you a bit of high praise here, but I want to set the stage for people who maybe don't know you. And so I think it'd be interesting if you could share a bit of like cliff notes on what was your path into Bitcoin, like what has kept you in Bitcoin, and maybe like what is John Light's personal North Star? What are you building towards here?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, for me, I eventually found my way through Bitcoin to Bitcoin through an interest in alternative currencies. This was like back around the time of the great financial crisis in 2008. And I found myself quite disillusioned with the legacy financial system and how the whole great financial crisis was handled by the government. And I kind of resolved to myself, like, if I have any kind of say in the matter, I would like to just opt out of this system, and yeah, just withdraw my consent from participating in it. And so I started looking for alternatives. There weren't really many, if any, like really good ones. I became like a gold bug for a while, because that was like the best alternative I could find at the time. And kept that interest up, and eventually, Bitcoin came across my desk. And at first, the very first time I ever heard of it, I didn't really have the context, and I thought it might just be like some kind of like wow gold kind of like video game currency or something like that. But I later heard about it again in a different context, and um, heard enough to think, well, maybe I should look into this. And so I started reading the Bitcoin wiki, and, realized, oh, this is not just like video game currency. It's a decentralized network, kind of like BitTorrent, but for money, and there's no one in control. Found out about the whole kind of Satoshi Nakamoto lore, the hard cap, 21 million coin cap, and so on and so forth, and realized like, oh wow, this is like very different than the other alternative currencies or even digital currency systems I had heard about before then. And it might actually like have a shot at being a real alternative to fiat currency and the legacy monetary system. And when once I kind of realized that, I decided like this is what I want to work on. I want to help Bitcoin reach its fullest potential, and get it into the hands of as many people as possible. Um, and have been working on it ever since then. I got my first full-time job in Bitcoin in 2013, and have been working on various projects in the industry ever since then.
So you said you kind of got your first full-time job in Bitcoin in 2013, but now, we're going into 2025. So you've been around for a minute. Like what has kept you here? I mean, after a certain point, haven't you, been there, done that? You've kind of seen it. Like, why have you kept going into this?
Yeah, the mission is not over. Is really the simplest explanation. Bitcoin has been quite successful in the time since then, but I think anybody who's been around long enough, and it doesn't take a decade to realize this, like there's still like a long way to go. And so, I'm not just here for some quick gains, like I'm here for the mission, which is to get Bitcoin into the hands of as many people as possible and make it a real viable alternative to fiat and the legacy banking system. And we're not there yet. So
Well, okay, so but help
here
me
I
understand.
am.
Yeah, so help me understand that mission, because you say like just get Bitcoin into the hands of more people. I mean, the obvious thing is like, well, Coinbase has done that exceptionally well. Like what more do we need? Like, is like what's the kind of original promise that for you personally that you hoped Bitcoin would fulfill? Is this non-custodial? Is this privacy? Is it scalability and programmability? Maybe it's all of the above. But like tell me more. Like, what is the mission here for John Light?
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the original vision laid out by Satoshi Nakamoto of a peer-to-peer electronic cash system without trusted third parties, without intermediaries, where we can replace trust with cryptography and proof of work. And that's not Coinbase. Like Coinbase is a trusted third party who's like holding people's Bitcoins and deciding whether or not to allow them to transfer their Bitcoins or withdraw their Bitcoins. Um, that's that's not Bitcoin adoption. That's bank adoption. And I'm here for Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah. And so I think you and I kind of originally crossed paths, I don't know, several years ago. And it was a little bit before you wrote this kind of paper about how we can build ZK rollups on Bitcoin. And so in my eyes, you are kind of like the godfather of bringing, the ideas of ZK rollups pioneered in some of these other ecosystems and saying we can potentially do this on Bitcoin. And now I am biased. I think that's the single most exciting thing going on in Bitcoin and maybe the entire industry. But like, take me through that. What prompted you to kind of pick up this novel piece of research and say, like, I am going to research and figure out a way to make this happen?
Yeah. I would say the genesis of that was actually also about, over a decade ago, like in 2013, uh, when I went full time into Bitcoin and started also doing a lot more research on the technical side. Um, I realized like Bitcoin itself, like the Bitcoin main chain, is not going to scale. Also, it has relatively limited capabilities. Um, and in order to keep it decentralized, we don't necessarily want all of the world's transactions to happen like on the Bitcoin main chain. And so even back then, I was already thinking about like, well, what if we could have like multiple blockchains, and then you could like transfer Bitcoin between them, and these different blockchains could make different trade-offs, maybe in terms of security or scalability. They might offer different kinds of programming environments or feature sets for different kinds of applications that people might want to deploy their Bitcoin into. And in 2014, the pegged sidechains white paper was published, which formalized these ideas. And that, really, I think, captured my imagination and solidified the idea for me, like that this is actually something that is possible. And so I kept tabs on like the sidechain development um, over the years. And at the same time, there was this like parallel track of research that was happening in other blockchain ecosystems, primarily Ethereum, where they're thinking about scaling their blockchain through this concept called sharding, and that ended up evolving into what is now like the roll-up centric roadmap, as they call it. And through kind of spending time in that ecosystem and delving into that research, I began to realize like there's a kind of these are like very similar ideas. This like sidechains concept and this like rollup centric roadmap, except that with rollups, we actually figured out like how to have trustless or like trust minimized sidechains. Um, and so that was really exciting to me because up until that point, um, the kind of state of the art with sidechains was like connecting uh, Bitcoin to a sidechain with like a multi-sig, um, and then some of the kind of further out there kind of research was like Paul Stortz's hash rate escrow concept, where the miners actually control the bridge for transferring Bitcoin between the main chain and these side chains. And like that's was exciting to me, but it's not trustless. And so uh, the prospect to me of having like actually like this network of chains that enables horizontal scalability and a kind of heterogeneous like application ecosystem to exist, all kind of connected trustlessly, was really exciting. And eventually, this opportunity came up where the Human Rights Foundation announced a grant for someone to produce a report, an industry report about the feasibility and cost benefits trade-offs associated with building rollups on Bitcoin. And so, because I had already done like a lot of the research and was actively researching Bitcoin bridges at the time, it just seemed like a really good fit for what I was interested in, something that I wanted to like spend more time on, specifically looking at whether rollups could be good for Bitcoin or even viable for Bitcoin. And so I applied for the fellowship, got the fellowship, and then later that year in October 2022, I published the report, Validity Rollups on Bitcoin, which people can find at bitcoinrollups.org. And you know, the rest, as they say, is history.
And so that in my opinion kind of became like the seminal piece, which people kind of woke up to and said, hey, we might be able to build rollups on Bitcoin. There was a piece from another team member of ours on Alpin, Trade Albanis, before, but I think yours is the one that really, kind of put it on the map. And at that time, you kind of wrote that paper, but it was filled with some caveats that said, this is just an idea. We really can't do this without, a pair of soft forks. So I think from my perspective, it maybe nerd sniped some people, but ultimately it's kind of like, this is a moonshot. Like this will never actually happen. And then fast forward, yeah, please go ahead, John. What was
I was going to say, I don't think I ever said it would never happen. But yeah, in order to have, and this is still the case today, in order to have trustless like bridges to rollups, we need a soft fork.
Well, okay, so then I'll ask you. I mean, like, are you taking a light, medium, strong position on like what soft fork you would like to see?
Based on my understanding of the proposals that are out there right now, I think that the work that Rusty Russell is doing on the Great Script Restoration Project would be the most like comprehensive kind of solution for enabling the most efficient kinds of validity rollups on Bitcoin. But we've also seen proof of concepts that show that like even with just opcat, it's actually technically possible to build like a validity proof verifier on Bitcoin in Bitcoin script. It's like a megabyte or two or something like that. But it's still technically possible. With the bundle of opcodes that's in the Great Script Restoration Project, we could probably get that down by at least an order of magnitude, if not more.
Okay. And so, going back to this paper, like you wrote this paper, we didn't necessarily have the soft forks. Now it's partially enabled by BitVM. It feels like things are ramping up pretty quick, and some of this stuff, it looks like it'll start coming to production, maybe within the next year or so. I'm curious, like, are you happy with how things are evolving in Bitcoin land with ZK rollups? Is this, when you wrote that paper, did you expect some of this to happen? That there's kind of a little bit of a renaissance happening around this as a scaling solution?
Yeah, I mean, things went in took a I would say a different trajectory than I was expecting at the time. I think at the time I probably thought something like, oh well, if the Bitcoin community reads this report and is like, all of the trade-offs and caveats taken into consideration, we think this is a good idea. Let's do it. Then, we would embark on some like track of like soft fork research and try to figure out, is there a soft fork that can like make the trustless rollups people happy, but also like maybe the Lightning people and, some of the other protocols that like need soft forks to like work well. And, we would eventually kind of rally around a soft fork and that would happen. And then we'd have trustless rollups and everybody would be happy. And what has happened instead is like, that's kind of happening, but there's this whole like parallel track of people who are like, well, I don't want to wait for a soft fork. I just want to build something now. And, shortly after I released my paper, Casey Rodimer launched the ordinals and inscriptions protocol on Bitcoin mainnet, showing that you could actually use the Taproot soft fork to embed up to like 400 kilobytes of data in a standard Bitcoin transaction and up to 4 megabytes of data, or almost 4 megabytes of data in a non-standard Bitcoin transaction. And that got people's minds thinking like, oh, well, what if we could just like use Bitcoin as a data availability layer for rollups today? And then, that kind of people from the rollups world kind of brought this idea of like quote unquote sovereign rollups over to Bitcoin. And, at first it was just like, oh, well, yeah, you can do a sovereign rollup, but like, what do we do about the bridge? Like, we don't have the soft forks needed to like build a trustless bridge. And so at first, people were thinking like, well, maybe we can just do something like a liquid federated bridge or like a TBTC kind of bridge. But then Rob and Linus published the BitVM paper, which opened up the possibility of having like a trust minimized bridge where you could, instead of needing an honest majority to secure the bridge, you could have a single party who is like if a single member of like some federation is honest, then the bridge remains functional. And that's like a pretty big leap in the state of the art to improve the trust model. And then he came out with BitVM 2, which introduced permissionless challenging, so you don't even need to trust one of the federation members to keep all of the other ones honest. Instead, anybody who has some Bitcoin will be able to monitor the bridge and prevent invalid withdrawal transactions going through the BitVM path. So that now is kind of like the state of the art, and where people on the bleeding edge are building, including Alpin. And it looks like it could be like a really solid intermediate step between what is possible today and what we'll be able to do after we get one of those soft forks.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple things there, and I want to make sure I separate them. There's kind of like the ability to build the rollup, which you call this kind of sovereign rollup, without the verification, without like the validity proof. And then there's the BitVM, which kind of allows us to hack in that verification functionality. So I'm curious, like, assuming we didn't have BitVM and you have this sovereign rollup, like what good is that? What point is that? It's just like you have this separate chain. How is that different from a side chain? Like, does it actually give you anything? Like talk just the raw roll up without the ZK aspect.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was one of the questions that I first had when I was thinking about this concept. But I think there is like some value in doing a sovereign rollup even without a BitVM. Um, One of the benefits is that you immediately get Bitcoin grade double spending resistance on your sovereign rollup chain. Um, because the way that like a rollup consensus works is that for each block that gets built on the rollup, it gets stored in a Bitcoin transaction, and then the next block must build on the previous block that was confirmed on Bitcoin. And the implication of this is that in order to reorganize a sovereign rollup block, you actually have to reorganize the Bitcoin block that sovereign rollup block was confirmed in. And so your reorg security on the sovereign rollup becomes equivalent to reorg security for any other Bitcoin transaction, which is really powerful. Um, Other side chains that have their own independent consensus mechanism, have their own security budget, which is usually not equivalent to Bitcoin. And so the cost of double spending is much cheaper. So for like higher security applications or transactions, the sovereign rollup model is good from that perspective. Of course, you're going to pay the cost for that security, but as we see with Bitcoin itself, there are plenty of people who are willing to pay that cost. And then the other main benefit is Bitcoin grade data availability. And so this is probably most useful for protocols that build on top of the sovereign rollup that are sensitive to data availability concerns. But instead of having, again, like a separate network, which has maybe like less nodes, less data replication across the globe to preserve, data availability, you can, if you're storing your data inside of a sovereign rollup block, that block is ending up inside of a Bitcoin block. And so therefore, your data availability guarantees are equivalent to Bitcoin data availability guarantee, which is, that data is going to be stored and replicated and made available through the syncing process by tens of thousands of nodes across the world. And so it's a very, very secure, very highly available data availability layer. Those are I think like the two benefits that sovereign rollups provide compared to other like maybe side chains and various other kind of models like that.
Okay, cool. So there are advantages to just kind of like the general roll-up structure as opposed to a sidechain. Now, the main thing that those things miss is really the ability to have BTC used in a trust minimized manner up into the rollup, where if you want to use it for DeFi or smart contracts or whatever. And so the way that we're kind of hacking in that functionality is using BitVM 2, as you alluded to. It has this like one event trust assumption as opposed to trustless. And so my question to you is BitVM 2, like, is it good enough? Obviously we want trustless, but do you think that it is good enough for our purposes? And maybe elaborate on why you think that.
Well, I think good enough is a subjective thing, and it also like varies depending on your use case. I think, is it the ideal long term? No. As soon as we get the soft forks, I'm very interested in implementing a trustless bridge and migrating from BitVM to a fully kind of trustless, natively verified ZK bridge. Is it good enough for certain kinds of applications or maybe certain thresholds of value before then? Yeah, I would say so. I wouldn't be working on it if I didn't believe so. Even before BitVM, I've been a user of the federated side chains, And I just the amount of value that I put in those systems is kind of proportional to like how risky I think they are, and I think that having a weaker trust assumption, which translates to like a stronger security model, um, in the BitVM 2 bridge, I think is going to translate to just me and like other users being willing to put like more value into that system. Um, and so I think it's the ability to kind of level up the amount of value that we can unlock is really for me like the important value add of BitVM 2.
Okay. And so, one of the questions that I struggled with and I get asked a lot is like, why are we bending over backwards to build this on Bitcoin? Like, why can't we just use these trust minimized bridges into Ethereum and Solana? Like, they already have the network effects, they have tons of liquidity and developers. Like, should we just kind of stop what we're doing at Alpin and just say, all right, just bridge it into these, Bitcoin's the store of value, and then all the activity happens on these other chains? Like, why shouldn't we do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it fundamentally it comes down to bridging between different consensus systems requires a trusted third party. And typically that, or like in practice, that means either a centralized trusted third party or some kind of honest majority trusted third party. And you can do that. That was possible before BitVM. But the unlock with BitVM is being able to move past the centralized or honest majority trust model to only requiring one of n of these bridge operators to be live and functional for the bridge to remain live. And you just can't get that if you were bridging into Ethereum because or any other L1 for that matter, because at the limit with that kind of bridge, you're ultimately trusting like that, a majority of the validator set in Ethereum is honest, or in practice, like with the bridges that exist today, like a majority of the sync committee in Ethereum is honest. And like, if people want to opt into that trust model, like more power to them. But, we're building BitVM 2 for the people who want the highest security for their Bitcoin while still being able to access other kinds of applications that just aren't possible to build on Bitcoin L1.
Well, I want to dig into this more because I didn't understand this, and I think most people won't either. It's kind of like, what do you mean that our ecosystem over on Ethereum, is going to be trusted if you try to bridge this Bitcoin using BitVM 2, but you guys, what you're building on Alpin, like you're saying that yours, has less trust. Like that doesn't make sense to me. Like, we're both using BitVM 2. Can you kind of explain, like, more explicitly, maybe an example of like why the trust is potentially degraded on these layers that use a different consensus system?
Sure. Yeah. So the fundamental problem is that the bridge needs to know what the canonical state of the side system, let's just call it a side system generically, is in order to be able to process a withdrawal. And with a BitVM 2 based rollup, that canonical state is recorded on Bitcoin, and it can only progress on Bitcoin. So like Bitcoin itself is defining the canonical state of the side system. Whereas, and so therefore it's relatively easy to prove what the canonical state of the side system is to the bridge using a zero knowledge proof. And if you tried to, say, fork the rollup in order to double spend the bridge, this would be easily detectable. because the fork itself must be recorded in the Bitcoin blockchain according to the consensus rules of the rollup. Whereas another side system that has an independent consensus mechanism, such as Ethereum or any other L1 blockchain or traditional side chains for that matter, the consensus is determined by some kind of external network, some external parties that are running a consensus protocol outside of Bitcoin. And so some kind of trusted third party needs to tell the Bitcoin bridge what the state of that side system is, like what the canonical state of that side system is. And that trusted third party could lie. It could say that the state is A when it's actually B. And this could have, catastrophic consequences for users of the bridge, because if I say that, the state is actually B and B is a state where, I say that I have all the money and I can drain the bridge or something like that, that could be, then the bridge breaks. And so does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. The way I think about it, and help me if I'm understanding this right, is yeah, I need to know if I want to withdraw from the side system, like I need to be able to tell the BitVM2 bridge like what my balance is. And if I'm on a roll up, then the way I determine my balance is literally by looking on the Bitcoin chain. Like the Bitcoin chain is the kind of canonical source of truth for the roll up. Versus if I have to go and ask for what my balance is on Ethereum, you're saying I'm trusting this alternative consensus layer, and there could be some sort of divergence there. I think it's that the roll up state can never kind of diverge from Bitcoin, but maybe the state on these other consensus layers can, and that leaves a little bit of a gap for a degraded trust assumption. Did I do a decent job of trying to explain that?
Yeah, I think that's another good way to explain the problem for sure.
Cool. Okay, I'm slowly learning from you, John. Okay, so I also wanted to ask, I kind of hinted at that, I see you as this like godfather of ZK rollups on Bitcoin. Like you probably could have gone and worked with any number of engineers and go out and do this. Like why, why are you doing this at Alpin? What was it about this kind of team that compelled you to say like, I want to contribute my efforts to this team, over anybody else?
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't start as a full-time employee. I started as an advisor in early 2023. And at that time, Alpin was actually probably the only people that I knew of who were actively working on productionizing and productizing a Bitcoin rollup. And, over the time getting to know the team, I became, more convinced that they have the skills and the experience necessary to achieve that goal. And there were other teams that, eventually came onto the scene, and they seemed like also, competent teams, good people. And so, I made connections and, still talk to other people working in this ecosystem today. But, the Alpin team has been, I think, really great at recruiting talent that we're going to need to succeed, not just in the short term, but in the long run. And I think they also come with like a unique perspective, having a background from the founders and a lot of the team coming from Nepal, where over half of the GDP of the country comes from remittances. They understand at a very deep level, I think, like how important like good financial infrastructure can be, and also how detrimental it can be and like hold you back if it's lacking. And so I think, having a team that's like hungry, that has this kind of innate drive, and desire to like not just improve the world, but improve the communities like directly around them, um, in a like really like tangible way, I think is a really powerful uh, motivator. And yeah, Alpin has just been really great, I think, at recruiting the best, brightest, and hardest working people, and uh, also people who understand the mission, maybe coming from different perspectives with slightly different, reasons for being here, but ultimately still working towards the same goal, which I think is really important when you're trying to achieve something really big like this.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I won't give my full spiel as to why Alpin, but I think that we're very fortunate. Like we have, some amazing founders, like some incredibly talented people on the technical and research side. And it feels like, we have like a strong ideological why that we feel that there's some greater vision that we're building towards. So hopefully, that kind of all pans out. I did want to ask you about one or two more things and maybe a passion of yours. I don't know, privacy. I'm kind of wondering, like, what are your feelings on privacy? Why do you think privacy matters? And what is happening on the bleeding edge of privacy and payments?
hmm Yeah, for me, my interest in uh, privacy, in particular, like digital privacy, is just like this desire to try as much as possible to retain the benefits of digital life, which include like instant, easy communication with people all over the world, um, access to the world's knowledge at your fingertips, that kind of stuff, um, while also preserving the privacy and freedom that we have in the physical world. Like when I'm just like at home or like going for a walk or like out with my friends or something like that, there's not like constantly, somebody with like a camera looking over my shoulder recording everything that I do. Um, but when I open up my laptop or smartphone and go onto any of the mainstream social media apps, like that's exactly what's happening. Is you've got like really hundreds, maybe thousands of like little, digital robots with cameras from like different corporations and like ad companies, like watching everything that you do and like recording everything that you do and trying to build a profile of you to like sell you ads and or even more nefarious things like, um and like that's just really weird to me that people are like okay with that, and that hundreds of thousands of or millions of engineers like spend all their day like building a system like that, and so uh for me it's just about like reclaiming the privacy, and freedom. I think they're intricately connected, that we have in the physical world in the digital realm.
And so, I mean, asking like, you and a few other people on the team have really kind of like given me a steel man for reasons why privacy. But I think the normal layman will look at that and be like, okay, cool. Like I'm being spied on. What's the big deal? Like, isn't there maybe a benefit that we're getting to that they're, I don't know, capturing terrorists and if we don't have this kind of like violation of privacy and the surveillance state, how can society survive? Do you have any hot takes on that?
Well, there's a lot, I think that could be said there. One is like, uh, I don't think surveillance is stopping any terrorist attacks. Another is it's I think probably like one of the biggest issues with the kind of like, oh, I've got nothing to hide and thing is like, actually you do. You don't think you do, but you do. And maybe you don't realize it now. Maybe you'll realize it when, you know, your embarrassing browsing history is leaked by your ISP, or you're trying to keep some kind of secret, maybe even like, like a relatively benign secret, but a surprise, from your family, and that gets out before it kind of spoils the surprise. Maybe it's, you know, you feel like everything is normal and you're just a normal guy going through life and, whatever, and today, but like maybe something happens tomorrow or next year that affects you or your family, and it radicalizes you, and suddenly you want to do something about it, and that puts you on the radar of people who want to stop you from doing something about it, and they go back through their surveillance history of you and find something that they can use against you. The person who you are today is not necessarily the person who you're going to be a year, 5, 10 years from now. Whereas, the memory on the internet, especially in these surveillance systems where they've got giant data centers out in the middle of the desert, just storing, tons of data on everybody for many years. Those systems are forever. And looking up sensitive details about your life is just a click away for some people out there. Already we're seeing how like backdoors in our communication systems are being leveraged by other countries to find weaknesses in our systems. Like there was the news about China getting, basically exploiting a backdoor that like law enforcement built into the telecommunications system to read the text messages and record the phone calls of almost every American. There were, you hear about these huge hacks of like people or companies losing hundreds of millions of people's data all the time, and that can lead to identity theft and all kinds of issues. I mean, it's just the problems that stem from a lack of privacy are just seemingly endless. Like you don't think it's that big of a deal like at first, but because of just how much information is being generated about you, it's like it's not just like any one individual thing. It's like the accumulation of that results in like an actually like very sensitive, very valuable data set, which I think it matters to people now. But even if you think it doesn't matter right now, you might decide at some point in the future that it really matters. And like, I think I would much rather that people like not expose that information and be able to go through those kinds of maybe transformative changes, and like be thankful that they weren't kind of exposing themselves over the internet for so long, rather than the alternative, which is today, like, people might, just kind of post a bunch of personal information, share a bunch of personal information with different third parties through the course of their lives, and then one day, realize like maybe, they get a certain job, or they go through some other kind of like big life change, and think like, oh, actually, like, I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I'd been more careful about my internet hygiene or digital privacy hygiene. And yeah, like it's just I think I understand why it is hard for people to comprehend, because the like leakage, if you will, is very uh it's like subtle. It's kind of like hidden behind layers of like abstraction and like nice application user interfaces and uh cookie consent buttons and stuff like that. But uh yeah, it's like um I think it's an important thing that like right now people have to educate themselves on. But I'm hoping like in the long run, we can just like build tools that protect people's information by default, and like most people default to like using those kinds of tools because um, that's what they're taught to do by their parents or by their schools or by their workplace or whatever. Like it's up to kind of all of us to protect us. The current people in power are not going to do it for you.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love being privacy pilled and kind of understanding the importance of it. And I think there are certain just inalienable rights that I think all citizens should have. Obviously, kind of like property rights with Bitcoin and free speech and this kind of ability to like opt out of censorship. And I think privacy is for me personally kind of getting right up there. And I just don't think that the default state that people should be automatically opted into is this like mass surveillance machine that you're kind of referring to. There's probably a lot there that could be a really fun conversation, but maybe the last and final question that I can ask you, and you can decide how in depth you want to go on this, is what does the future look like for what you're working on and ZK rollups in general? Like, is it we create this trust minimized bridge? Maybe we get a ZK verification opcode, and then we have like an EVM layer that we work on our Bitcoin. Like, is that sufficient, or is there more beyond this vision?
Mm. Yeah. Well, I think that what we're working on is in a lot of ways like extending the capabilities of Bitcoin, not just to an EVM layer on Bitcoin, but to have any kind of layer on Bitcoin. Like ZK is a really powerful, almost like translation tool where you can use it to like translate all of these different programming languages into something that Bitcoin can understand. Um, and like that unlocks so much more than just EVM. It unlocks, it could unlock all kinds of different virtual machines, and even including even like versions of Bitcoin that don't exist yet. Like, for example, we could have like a Bitcoin, a rollup that looks like Bitcoin, but maybe it has different opcodes that the Bitcoin main chain itself like doesn't have. Like really the possibilities are near endless. And that to me is like really exciting because it turns Bitcoin into a platform where developers have almost complete freedom to build like any kind of application for Bitcoin that they could imagine. And I think that's going to unleash a whole new wave of innovation on Bitcoin, and give Bitcoiners many more options of how to use, store, transact Bitcoin. Today, you can do like multi-sig and maybe like some time locks and like Lightning, and like not much else. But in the future, you might be able to use other kinds of trustless L2s with much better scaling properties or much better privacy that you just simply are not possible on Bitcoin L1 today.
Very interesting. So it kind of gives us this total optionality to, build whatever system you may want on top of Bitcoin. I am thinking almost like, it's like the multiverse, not to sound like cliche, but, it's like there are all these different, instantiations and paths that people can build. And, maybe we can take a radically unopinionated stance on that and allow people to build, what they want, how they want, and when they want. So I think there's an interesting vision there. Maybe that's too far forward, but nice to look into the future a little bit.
Yeah, your kids are gonna love it.
Or your AI children. The AI overlords are going to have amazing money. All right, cool. Well, I think that's everything that I wanted to cover, John. I super appreciate you kind of coming on and sharing your knowledge. So hopefully we can do it again.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for the questions, and see you all.
Take care.